Thanks everyone for joining. My name is Jon Mallon, and I'm the CEO of the Telosa Community Foundation. And I'd like to welcome you to our first Telosa Talks program today. Community 2.0, the power of working together, how we can transform our cities and towns. Appreciate your interest and want to thank you for taking time to join us. Our Telosa Talks is a new series focused on community, which is intended to be more personal and interactive than our webinar format that many of you will be familiar with. We hope you'll enjoy this and find it informative. In just a few moments, I'll be introducing our featured guest and expert, Tom Rossman, who I'll be conversing with. Our topic on community today is particularly timely and relevant as our society is facing growing polarization, loneliness, increased mental health issues, and other serious challenges. This creates a very difficult environment for us to communicate effectively with others, to plan, to make decisions, and this has a very real and direct bearing for all of us on our quality of life. This is a time when we most need to find ways to work together, to talk, to listen, and support each other. We need to work toward a shared purpose. Historically, as we'll discuss, this is when our society has been at its best and thrived. We'll be discussing a new concept, which we're very excited about. We call it Community 2.0 as a way forward and a solution to our challenges today. It's a recognition that we are all in this together. Everyone has a role and everyone can benefit. At Telosa, we always start with our mission to create a more equitable and sustainable future. As our research has clearly shown, all successful cities and towns are designed around how to meet the needs of people. Our work at Telosa, therefore, from the beginning, has focused on putting people first. It's a core element of everything that we've done, from our town hall meeting to growing our online community, to our focus group discussions, our surveys, our research reports, as well as our designs with global architect firm BIG and its visionary architect Bjorke Ingels, to our work with Polco, a leading data analytics and community engagement firm, which is a natural partnership, and our outreach to state officials on local site selection and economic analysis leads with people as well. It's ultimately about taking steps to create a higher quality of life and greater access to opportunity. As noted, cities and towns with greater sense of community do better. They're more resilient, healthier, happier, and wealthier. Creating a strong sense of community is therefore essential. So how do we get there? With that, let me introduce Tom Rossman. Tom is a long-standing senior advisor to the Telosa Community Foundation, a board member of the Henry George School of Social Science, and expert historian. He is a global thought leader who has studied how social, cultural, political, and economic factors interact to produce or not produce the conditions for thriving and flourishing societies. Tom, welcome.
Thank you, John.
So, Tom, let's start with an important question. What is Community 2.0?
Community 2.0 is community for the 21st century. It's how we create the strong social bonds, networks of reciprocity, and the high levels of social capital in the age of social media, smartphones, and the internet.
Okay, so as a historian, you know the importance of learning from history so that we can apply it to the present and move forward. So can you put a little context in terms of Community 2.0 relative to where we were? How is it different?
Sure. Well, that's one of the key problems. We've been studying the issues of community for a number of years and have written extensively about it. But the problem is most of the scholarship about community connections and social bonds is based on research that focused on 50 or 60 years ago. And it's, in a way, it's very understandable that that's the way that it is, because the early 60s is when our community connections were the strongest that they've ever been. You know, Robert Putnam, who's the godfather really of community research, has the famous I curve, which peaks in the early 60s and then starts to moderate and then decline over the 70s and 80s and even till today. But the reality is that the conditions today, society today, is very different than it was in the 50s and 60s. So today we have digital natives. The millennial generation and Gen Z grew up with technology, and they are very comfortable in forming connections and bonds over the internet as just a natural way that they live their lives. And even the older generations are increasingly reliant on technology. I don't know anyone whose mother is not on Facebook. So um, there's a giant change and shift in the way that people relate to each other and interact with each other. So currently, we have the traditional physical community and the spread of the online community. We need to integrate those two things and how we create those, as I mentioned, social bonds and high levels of social capital in 2025.
So Tom, by most measures, economically, we've seen great progress over the last 50 to 60 years,
Mhm.
but almost all other measures that relate to quality of life have declined. How can you discuss the discrepancy there?
Yeah, well, I think it's really understanding the problem is sort of at the key. And Albert Einstein famously said that if he had 1 hour to solve a problem, he'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes on the solution. And so we have to solve. The first thing is we have to solve the right problem. So all these things that you're talking about, polarization, the isolation epidemic, the lack of resilience in communities, depression, anxiety disorders, deaths of despair. These are all products of the decline of community. The shift it from we're all in this together to it's all about me. And this extreme isolation is mentally and physically and socially extremely destructive. In fact, the US Surgeon General declared a few years ago that it is so damaging that it's the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
So, if you were to describe the biggest contrast from where we were to where we are today, before we get into the future and the importance of Community 2.0 and the impact that we can derive from it, can you give that perspective, the past versus today?
Well, in the past, we had much stronger social bonds and much stronger networks of reciprocity and high levels of social capital that we were able to employ to solve problems like economic issues, coming together to make decisions as communities and cities. Also, the ability to help each other out in a crisis. That's extremely important. And the social science research is very clear on the fact that, as you mentioned before, communities that work together and have strong measures of social bonds are more unified, more prosperous, have higher education levels, are safer, and are over mentally and physically healthier. And so I think it's very compelling to point that out and realize that, in the 50s and 60s, when we had these strong bonds and social capital, we had a much different uh, functionality, much better level of functionality of how communities and cities and towns work.
So, Tom, are you saying that we should go back to the 1950s and 60s? Is that the answer?
No, absolutely not. In fact, that's one of the really big innovations of Community 2.0 is that we're recognizing that we can't go back, and the way that community operated in the 50s and 60s with local clubs and much higher church attendance. There were a lot of different organizations that people belong to on a regular basis. Today, we have to realize it's a fact that people connect via the internet. And right now, the trend for the last 15, 20 years with social media and smartphones and all other types of internet companies, we've seen this massive shift towards isolation, which is exacerbating the anxiety levels, the depression levels, and this is actually affecting very dramatically younger people. 18 to 24-year-olds have the highest level of depression and anxiety of any other demographic cohort. So it's a very important problem, and it's affecting our young people in a very significant way. So we have to answer your question, we have to adjust, and we have to create those networks of social capital and social bonds with the reality of how people interact and connect in today's age.
And what are people attributing as a source of these problems, the polarization, the mental health issues, and anxiety, and what what is the sort of the view as to what's the source of the problem?
Yeah, a lot of the scholarship points directly to social media and smartphones. It was around 2012, 2014, when the levels of anxiety, suicidal ideation, and depression really started to go up dramatically in younger people. And there was recently a major meta study done that showed for younger kids aged 13 to 18, and it found that they are acting out much more. They have much more anger. They have much more outbursts and disciplinary problems in school. And so there is definitely a direct correlation between social media, smartphones, and behavioral problems in every level. In older people, deaths of despair. The Nobel Prize was awarded to Angus Deaton, who wrote extensively on deaths of despair, which are people in their 40s and 50s are actually have are actually for the first time in American history, their life expectancy is actually declining in 45 to 50-year-old people. So this problem is a pervasive problem. It's an extensive problem, and restoring that sense of community is at the core of restoring the level of excitement and cohesion and unity that is needed for society to function properly.
So given the problems that we're facing today, what are some of the solutions that are being worked on to try and address these problems and to move forward?
Yeah.
What's happening today?
Well, the first thing we need to do is we have to recognize the problem. We have to have a mindset shift. Community is vital in creating a thriving, flourishing city or town. And the decline in community overall of the past half century has had terrible consequences for all of us, both personally and for society. And the second thing is we have to know that it's very important that this change needs to be made. And it makes a big difference for both of us as individuals and as a group, because recognizing the reality that community is very different than in the pre-internet age is a core factor in addressing the actual root of the problem. And then thirdly, people need to get involved. They need to begin to use the internet and social media to forge strong community connections, not separate ourselves into silos of individuals, because that isolation then begins to snowball, and it leads to more isolation and more alienation from society.
Tom, you mentioned the importance of recognizing the problem so that we can make sure that we address and solve the right problems. Can you
Mhm.
give a sense historically where that point is well illustrated?
Sure. There's a lot of really great inflection points. You had William Wilberforce in England about ending the slave trade. You had the Uncle Tom's Cabin in the 1850s with Harriet Beecher Stowe that really awoke the conscience of the North as to the evils of slavery. You had Jacob Riis, who wrote a book and illustrated pictures of the working class conditions, and actually personally inspired Teddy Roosevelt by taking him in disguise throughout the Lower East Side of New York at night, and realizing the absolute squalor and desperation that people were living in, and really awakened his conscience. Frances Perkins did the same thing with FDR. And interestingly enough, she was sort of a typical upper middle class person, a lady who lunched if you will, that type of person, until she actually she witnessed firsthand the Triangle Shirtwaist Coat Factory fire and literally saw these women and young girls being burned alive because of the horrible safety conditions inside this factory in downtown New York. And then she inspired Franklin Roosevelt to do things like Social Security and unemployment insurance and many other reforms that took place during the New Deal. And Michael Harrington also inspired both Kennedy and Johnson to embark on the reforms that led to the Great Society, which gave us Medicare and Medicaid and so many of the poverty reduction programs that occurred in the 1960s. And a lot of people aren't aware of this, but from 1959, the poverty rate was over 20% in America. And within a decade, they cut that nearly in half. So recognizing the need to do these things is so important, because until we have enough people who are committed to this and really understand the problem and are willing to address it, it's very hard to make this level of change.
So Thomas, about first recognizing the need, and then the second point, as you mentioned, some of the policies, unemployment insurance, Social Security, which really create sort of a support to the idea that we're all in this together.
Yeah.
And those policies sort of strengthen our community and, are still, with us, today is an important way of supporting societal needs. So do you want to talk further about that second point in terms of once we understand the problem, it's finding solutions to implement and sort of to take action, how important that
Yeah,
is.
absolutely. I mean, I think the number one issue is that even though the scholarship and the empirical evidence is very overwhelming, our challenge is really about taking this idea of community and applying it to the age of the internet, social media, smartphones. And that's going to be an ongoing challenge. We're actually going to be releasing a number of white papers, as you know, John, to address this issue, on putting more meat on the bones in terms of how we're going to do this. And we're going to need a lot of people. We're going to need input from the Telosa community and people from around the world who really care about changing this issue, because the challenges of internet technology in the digital age are different than anything we've been able to study in history. I mean, things are changing so rapidly, and so not just applying these great concepts to the new form of dynamics of how people communicate and interact, but also being able to respond to things like the changing nature of work and the integration of AI into society. So we have a lot of challenges ahead of us, and I'm very excited about the fact that we have, I believe we have a very, very strong framework to talk about this and get ideas from the community, our community, and other communities, so that we can really build these things up and have an effective approach.
And Tom, given that people are busy today, their daily lives and the challenges to make time for community.
Mm.
Many people may not fully appreciate how important it is, and there are distractions and changes, and again, daily necessities as well. How do we make the point that uh, ensures that people are willing to make the efforts and see the benefits and the value, because everyone has an important role, and if everyone isn't active, we're not going to see the benefits for society as a whole.
Yeah. Well, we really need to return to that American spirit of we're all in this together, not everyone isolated by themselves. When John F. Kennedy asked, said his famous phrase, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." The American people found that incredibly inspiring, and he wasn't attacked for political fluff or overstatement or histrionics. People took it seriously, and they felt a strong sense of urgency and unity deeply in their souls. As a country, we use that unifying message to put a man on the moon, address the civil rights disparities, address the rights and respect for women, cut poverty rates, and so much more. At the same time, we have to recognize that society is very different than in 1961, and we can't revive the community bonds and build the social capital by just replicating what we did back in the 50s and 60s. So the benefits of a strong community bonds are incredibly obvious. It has consistently been shown to improve the health, safety, prosperity, education, infrastructure, good governance of towns and cities, improving the quality of life overall for those individuals. So the challenge for us is to rebuild the sense of community that we're all in it together in the internet, social media, and smartphone age. Now, and as I mentioned, we're publishing a series of white papers and other, we're doing more Telosa talks as well that will address this. And I'm very excited to be part of it because I think it's one of the most important topics that social science is talking about today, and it's something that our society desperately needs to address and respond to.
Tom, can you just mention quickly what we're talking about has direct bearing on existing cities? Can you talk about, as it relates to Telosa, what this means in planning a future city?
So for future cities, the organization of a future city is really benefited from the fact that you're starting from scratch. So you can build these levels of interactions in the physical space, and also by having a diversity of people, both racially and ethnically, as well as income wise, being in different neighborhoods, so that you have forms of interaction where people are constantly interacting with each other, as opposed to a lot of major cities today that are sort of built. Specific neighborhoods have very homogenous populations, and then you have these large, steel and glass towers that everybody goes from their large glass tower apartment to their large glass tower office and then back every day without interacting. So I think, building in those structures, building in those social systems that allow people to interact and connect with each other, because the issue of identity is so important, because if you view yourself as a member of a community, it's a whole different perspective than if you take the mindset of some kind of political um, uh, position or point of view, or some kind of social issue. If you look at yourself as you're all members of a community, you all have a stake in what's happening in the functioning of your society, as well as helping your neighbors, who will in turn help you when you're having difficulties or problems. It's a complete mind shift in the direction of recognizing that we are all in this together, and isolation is not good for us on any level.
Oftentimes people feel that their individual efforts won't make a difference,
Mm-hmm.
and it sort of deters people from making those making that first step and getting involved. Can you
Mm-hmm.
give an example of what's possible? Just what can one person do?
Well, I think it's probably less understood about history, but typically you had a fairly small number of people making major social changes. There were a few thousand Bolsheviks in Russia that that took over the entire country of 150 million people. Same thing with the women's rights movement, the abolition movement in the United States, even the civil rights movement had a very small core leadership, and they over time recruited and developed different groups and organizations that were willing to go out on the front lines. And that famous saying that a small group of people is the only thing that's ever changed society. It's really true. It's not about mass movements. It's not about signing online petitions. It's about getting people who are really committed to the cause, and empowering them with the right ideas and the right framework to go out there and make the change personally.
Have you given one example story of a sort of nonprofit local organization that started with one person, I
Sure.
believe in Chicago?
Yeah.
Do you want to share that story?
Yeah, no, it's very inspiring on how people can make a difference. There was a gentleman who moved to Chicago from a small town. He went to a university in a small town, and he went to Chicago and found that he had no network of friends or even contacts or colleagues, and started to get a few business people together in a conference room, and that organization from a very humble beginnings, and they were just focused on community service. They weren't allowed to discuss business. They weren't there for, for financial connections, but they were there for service, um, the fellowship bonds of talking with and interacting with other businessmen, and then also for community service. And today, that organization, the Rotary organization, is collected and distributed billions of dollars in philanthropies, have charities all around the world and thousands of members. In fact, interestingly enough, their first project was to provide public toilets in Chicago, which in the downtown area had no public toilets. You had to go to a restaurant or a hotel, which of course, if you weren't dressed properly and looked properly, you weren't able to get into the hotels and the restaurants. So they really had a heart and a soul for fellowship and community and helping others. And that kind of spirit is very powerful. And the we just aren't getting. I mean, I think the reality is we just aren't getting together as much anymore. And that's, there's a lot of empirical evidence of that. But I think one of the most profound levels of that is the fact that when we can use the internet is here to stay, and it's part of our lives. It's part of how we communicate. But we can use the internet to drive isolation, or we can use the internet to drive people together and organize and do meetup groups and join clubs and interact with your neighborhood. And so I think it's, mindset shift is so important, because the internet is a tool, and it can be used for good or it can be used for bad. And I think it's been, we've had some really serious negative impacts of that over the past 10 years. And we've also seen great things. I just ordered something from Amazon today, and it's going to be here tomorrow. So there's tremendous benefits, and there also are a cost. And where community is concerned, I think it's led to some significant challenges that we can address and really turn that around.
Great. Well, on that note, Tom, I want to thank you for sharing your unique perspective and insights today. The idea today was to introduce Community 2.0, which we'll be continuing to do. I wanted to define it, to give some historical framework, to discuss the problems today and how Community 2.0 can bring a different mindset and recognition that we're all in this together, that we need to make an effort, and that we're all stronger when we work together. We'll be sharing more specifics on what this means for all aspects of how we live, work, and interact with others, our education, health, jobs, housing, resilience, really everything. Meantime, for those that want more information, please reference our Building a World-Class City. It's a white paper. This QR code is available on the screen to access the report, as well as our community guidebook for best practices, case studies, and really underpinnings of the importance of community, what we can all do together. As a wrap up, I'll ask Tom if he has any sort of closing statement.
Yeah, I think, when you look at the history of important inflection points in society, you realize that the choices that people make really determine how that society develops. And we can, the American Revolution was very positive and turned into this tremendous country. The French Revolution went the other direction, and they didn't get democracy for almost another 100 years. And I believe, and again, the Civil War and World War I and World War II, I think the major point, the major message is that we have the choice. We have the choice to get involved and make a change and make a difference. We are being confronted with a very serious challenge for our society. And it's important that we make the right decisions to prepare ourselves for all the new challenges that are coming up. And if we want to get back to that American spirit of building and putting a person on the moon and exploring outer space and solving, curing cancer and all the wonderful things that we can do and that we're on our way toward doing. Um, the energy and the unity and the inspiration are really rooted in the fact that we're all in this together. So going forward with a unified message and a unified vision of what we can accomplish together, collaboration is one of the most important factors in the 70,000 year history of Homo sapiens. So for us to cooperate and work together as a community, that has been proven over and over again as being one of the most effective measures that we can take to benefit ourselves, our families, and our nation.
Great. Well, thanks, Tom. And also, we look forward to seeing you, our audience, again as we continue our Telosa Talks on this new and particularly important topic, Community 2.0, as we work together to create a more equitable and sustainable future. Thank you.